Hello, listeners. Joining us today on the podcast is Dr. William Yan. Dr. William Yan, thank you again for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So, quick intro before we start the questions. As Dr. William Yan obtained his bachelor and master's degree in microbiology and a PhD in medical microbiology and infectious diseases from the University of Alberta. But I know Dr. William Yan through Health Canada. So, he started at the Health Canada's Food Directorate as a research scientist in 1995. And from there on, he's tackled a lot of the food regulations and labeling regulations as we know of today. But I will let you speak about your journey, Dr. William Yan. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your passions, and your journey into this industry.
Sure. Well, happy to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, so as you said, I basically spent my entire working career at Health Canada, but doing a number of different jobs. And at the same time, while I was there, I also had the opportunity to do some teaching at the University of Ottawa. And after retiring about almost 4 years ago now, I've actually really done more teaching than before. And I will probably share a little bit more with you about that later on. So, yeah, so like you said, my career has been spent around both food safety and nutrition. So the first half was more looking at the safety of the food supply. And then the second half of my career was really focusing on some of the big projects we had under what we call the healthy eating strategy, which is you might have seen some of the work coming out from there, revising the nutrition facts table, introducing the front of package labeling. You're seeing some of the symbol that we put on prepackaged foods now that shows the food that are high in either sodium, saturated fat, or sugars. And then also the last major project I did before I retired was to help develop a brand new regulation called the Supplemental Food Regulations, and which again, we'll probably talk about that in a little bit more details later. So my passion, I guess, is really about, helping consumers get access to safe and nutritious food and allow industry to introduce food that are innovative and satisfy the need and the curiosity of the consumer. When I started off in Health Canada, as you said, I was a research scientist. So I was working in the lab. I was doing, research and publishing paper like most academias do. But then I was really lucky to have a chance to sort of branch out on my career a little bit and got into the risk assessment and policy regulatory side of things. And the big difference there is, while doing research is really important because everything we do is guided by evidence and by science, but research is slow. We make incremental advances in knowledge. We publish papers. But what we find is that when you work in policy and regulations, everything we do have a direct impact right away, whether we approve of food or we don't approve of food, or we require industry to put a label on a food. Everybody gets affected. And let's face it, we all eat. So everything we do impacts everybody every day. And I think that really brings a lot of, job satisfaction and allow us to keep working and trying to make a difference. So to me, that's really what helped me kind of stay passionate through over 27 years of working at Health Canada.
Wow, what an incredible journey and career. And, it sounds like through research, but then also direct policy that impacts a lot of the foods that we eat. And like you said, we're all eating on a regular basis. And for this, it's, the foods that we consume, the foods that we choose, like there's so many different pathways. And, I was just like, oh, which pathway do we start off on first, when it comes to supplemented to the front of the pack. But I know, we have a lot of innovators when it comes to the food industry listening to this podcast. And would you mind breaking down the supplemented food side for us, foods versus supplemented foods, and perhaps even the differences between those and natural health products?
Absolutely. So maybe just starting from the top. So
Sounds good.
I think it's great that I think most Canadians don't think about safety concerns when they go shopping or when they go out to eat in a restaurant. They just take it for granted that, in general, the food that they buy or they eat is safe. And that's a great thing. And in fact, Canada is well known to have probably one of the safest and, most nutritious food supply in the world. But that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because a lot of work goes into it from government, from industry, from all sectors of industry, all the way from the farm to the distribution, to manufacturing, to producing the food. And then also the consumer plays a role in the whole food safety, right? Because if they don't read the label or if they don't prepare food correctly, then they may get into trouble. So I think from a starting point is that we all know our food supply is safe. Now, you may be surprised if I tell you that probably 90% of the food that we eat are not pre-approved by Health Canada. Okay, so when you think about that, whereas on the other hand, if you buy a drug or a health product, like even a natural health product, every single one of those products are reviewed and licensed by Health Canada, but not food. Now, the one obvious reason is because if we were to do that, I think Health Canada would have to hire, 100 times more people because the number of food products that we have. So that brings us to what we call a combination of pre-market versus post-market approach to regulating our food supply. Now, the post-market just means if you were going to sell a new food or you're manufacturing a new food, in general, you don't need to go to Health Canada and ask for an approval or get a license. But what you're expected to do is to be familiar with all the regulations and standards that apply to the food that you're making. And it's your responsibility to make sure that you produce a food that's safe. And if you're not sure, you can go and consult with Health Canada to make sure you're not doing something wrong. So that's what we call the post-market approach. So you go make the food, it goes out in the market, everything's fine. Now, obviously, we are human. Sometimes, once in a while, things go wrong. So there is a system of check and balance that brings back the food into a safe use if something goes wrong. But that's the job of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Health Canada to do that. But in general, our food supply is very safe because everybody takes it seriously and they know what they're doing. That being said, there are some very specific categories of food that do require a pre-assessment, that do require approval by Health Canada before somebody can sell this food. Now, you may think about, for example, infant formula. Obviously, we don't want to just put infant formula out and hope nothing goes wrong, right? We're talking about a very special consumer of these products, so that has to be pre-market assessed. Same as things like food additives and, sweeteners and things like that. They have to be approved for particular use by Health Canada. And then another example would be a special class of food called novel foods. And that would include something like a genetically modified food or something like that. You may have heard of these new technology now, maybe some insect protein or maybe lab-grown meat meat that actually grown in the lab rather than from an animal. So obviously these are really new technology that we know nothing about. So we all want to find out more about them and approve and assess them before we actually, eat these food. So that brings us to supplemental foods. Okay. Now it's interesting that you mentioned natural health product because for most consumers, if you ask them 10 years ago what these products were, they would have told you that these were natural health products because they actually came into the market as natural health products. They have licenses. And yet, when you look at the categories of products we're talking about, these are things like vitamin water, energy bars, energy drinks, that they actually look more like a food, but they came to the market as natural health products. And there's a whole long history behind that. What Health Canada decided to do was to try to minimize that confusion and regulate these products the way they should be regulated, which means they should be regulated as foods.
Mm.
The challenge there is that at that time, these foods were not allowed to be on the market as a food because they have nutrients like vitamins and minerals and amino acids that are added to them. And these nutrients are very tightly regulated. You can't just add things if you like it, because we tend to use food as a vehicle to do what we call food fortification. So you all know, our milk has been fortified, with calcium, and our flour is enriched by folic acid. So this is a way to give these nutrients to the general population so they can meet the nutrient demands. So supplemented food is a little bit different. They all have the same kind of nutrients, but these nutrients are not added for public health reasons. They're added to give consumers some other benefits, like maybe energy, maybe you can make them sleep better, maybe it will increase their physical performance, whatever it is giving some benefit, but it's not for nutrient uptake. So we didn't have a way to manage these foods, and they were not allowed to be sold as a food. So that created a big problem. And when we decided to regulate them as a food, we had to, first of all, accommodate them in the market, and then also at the same time try to come up with new regulations. Now, as a regulator, ideally, we would develop new regulations and then allow products to go on the market. In this case, it was backwards. There were thousands of these products on the market already being sold as NHPs, but then now we're trying to catch up and develop regulations that are right for them. So it wasn't the ideal situation, and it created a lot. It pushed us to have to be a little more creative and look at things, doing things differently. Now, as I said earlier, these are very special categories of foods, and by definition, a supplemented food is a food that is prepackaged, and it has some nutrient, amino acids, or bioactives added to it for benefits beyond public health. So right now, if you look in the marketplace, really probably the most common supplemented food you'll see would be the energy drinks. They are the biggest. They were the first one to come to the market. They are still the category that makes up most of the products. Probably followed by things like vitamin water and, some of the bars and gummy formats of vitamins and things like that. But since the regulations came into force in 2022, we're starting to see other products starting to come to the market. So this is going to be an interesting category of products to monitor, to see how they catch on going forward the next several years. So when we developed these regulations, we really had three objectives in mind. Obviously, the number one objective is make sure consumer can consume these products safely. As you know, with a lot of nutrients, we need these nutrients to a certain extent. But once you overconsume some of these nutrients, you can actually get into trouble. So we want to monitor that very closely and make sure people don't overconsume, because they could be getting these nutrients from conventional foods, from supplemented foods, but also if they take dietary supplements, they're getting the same nutrients. So we want to make sure that in total, they're not exceeding or coming up to the maximum level that's, that is specific for each nutrient. So safety is number one. Number two is we don't really see Health Canada. We don't want to be telling people what to do most of the time. We would prefer to give consumer information and allow them to make their own informed decision to decide what they want to buy or not buy for themselves or for their family members. So the second objective is to provide consumer the information they need to make an informed choice. And then finally, probably just as important, is we want these regulations to be nimble and to be able to withstand the test of time, so that 5 years after the regulations are published, with all kinds of new products coming to the market, the regulations should still be relevant and should still be able to manage these products, so we don't have to go back and change the regulations again. So those are the three key things we try to do. And I think overall we have succeeded in doing that. We created very, very specific levels that would guide industry how much of a nutrient they can add to which category of food when they're putting one of these foods on the market, one of these foods to the market. We also put in a number of labeling requirements to give consumer information. Now, you may have seen, on products like vitamin water or energy drinks, there's actually a identifier that looks a lot like the front of package label, but it's actually unique for supplemented foods. It has an exclamation mark and it tells you that food has been supplemented. And the idea there is that once you see that symbol, you should go to the back and see if there's any caution statements or limitations or warning that certain populations should not be consuming this product. And then we also have what we call a supplemented food facts table that look a lot like the nutrition facts table, but it has a new section that actually lists all the supplemented ingredients that has been added. So that, again, if you're a consumer and you're wondering what has been added to this product, you can go there and find out exactly what you're going to be consuming when if you buy that product. So these are all ways that we can try to, make sure consumers get the right information. And then finally, the regulations are made in a way that if we have new products or new ingredients that somebody wants to add to a food, it allows them to go to Health Canada and get permission to sell this new food. So it's the first time we have a regulation in Canada that actually uses both the pre-market approach and the post-market approach to manage these supplemented foods. So in other words, if you were a brand new manufacturer of these foods and you choose to follow the limits and choose the nutrients that's allowed to add it to a category that's allowed to be added to, you're good to go. You can make that product, make sure it meets all the other requirements for safety, and you can launch a product without having to go to Health Canada. On the other hand, if you want to be really innovative and come up with a brand new product using an ingredient that's never been added before, you still have a chance to do that. But now you will have to go to Health Canada to get the approval. You have to provide data to show that it's safe. And if Health Canada agrees, then they will make changes to the regulation and allow this new product to be on the market. So the both pre-market and post-market approach allow us to make sure that these regulations will stay current, hopefully for many, many years to come. So that's a little bit of a long history of where these products came from, where they are now, and where it could be heading into the future.
I mean, much appreciated as someone who does work in the innovation side, having regulations that are flexible to encourage innovation. And, as Canadians, our brand is well respected all across the globe, right? When we try to export to Korea, people know that Maple Leaf and know and understand that, yes, our products are safe and they're truly of high quality and innovative. And now hearing, the change on approaching when it comes to supplemented foods, I think is really smart because, say, for instance, I look at the regulation, I only see maybe, I don't know how many list of categories that you're allowed to in the supplemented food space. So say, for instance, I want to create like a hot chocolate mix, but use mushroom extracts as opposed to powder. So I'm clicking on it, trying to find the list of permitted supplemented ingredients. I don't see the mushroom extracts. But as an innovator, I know that, like you mentioned, there is that pre-market approval. So now, yes, there's some flex, which I think is super innovative and creative as a regulator, and still allows the safety and quality of ingredients. So say I want to add mushroom extracts. Now I have to go through Health Canada. and then apply to it for that product to be added on the list of supplemented
Exactly.
ingredients,
Yeah.
right? Or permitted supplemented ingredients.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank-
And I think this is so helpful to understand because I think there's often, especially in development, working in innovation, especially if you've been more food focused, right? Creating
Right.
foods in manufacturing ecosystem. And then now there's this opportunity to leverage even more benefits into the development platform. And I think, thank you so much for laying this out
Yeah.
because I think it helps to demystify the
Mhm.
process and it makes supplemented foods more approachable because there is information and there's definitely a pathway to bring in more innovation and of course being mindful because you mentioned you don't want to tell as a Health Canada you don't want to have to tell people what to do but you want to educate consumers so that they feel empowered to make their own decisions for themselves and then also for their families as well. So I think this is a really helpful discussion. I think also timely because as we're
Yeah.
looking at different ways, especially when it comes to product differentiation as brands, and there's more ingredients becoming more available in different formats. And the question does become, can I use this? And what do I need to do from a regulatory perspective? So this is all very helpful.
Dr. William, I want to ask
Mhm.
one other question.
Sure.
For NHPs, right, on that side of things, it does require a site license and an NPN submission. But when it comes
Yeah.
to supplemented foods, you don't need any of that because it's
Mhm.
not part of the natural products. Just to clarify, just for those who are wanting to understand the regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're correct. So food and natural health products are regulated under different frameworks.
Mhm.
So on the food side is mostly the Canadian Food Inspection Agency that's responsible for the inspection, the compliance, and all the other activities. And if you are a food manufacturer, you do require a license. Everybody that manufactures
Yes.
food require a
Mhm.
license under the Safe Food
Yes,
for
yes.
Canadians Act and regulations. But that doesn't mean there's actually a site inspection and
Mhm.
it's more like a paper exercise to get a license. And that's mainly for trace back. If you have to take some, corrective action, then we don't want to waste time
Mhm.
finding out who to contact at the time. So you're absolutely right. There's a huge difference between NHPs and any kind of food, including supplemental food, when it comes to site licensing and inspection and activities like that. So one thing, maybe just circling back, I want to just build on what both of you have said is when we look at these regulations, especially the new ones that have to, deal with new technology and innovation, regulations is done not in a silo just by Health Canada. For a new regulation to be useful and effective, there's a lot of collaboration and engagement goes on during that development process between the government, but also with stakeholders like industry stakeholders, health stakeholders, and consumer groups. Because let's face it, these are the experts. Like they are the ones that actually, know about the ingredient. They develop the food. Health Canada is just there to try to make sure that these foods are going to be made safely and, doesn't have potential risk to the consumer. So the, I truly believe the reason why the supplementary food regulations were successful and were able to address all our objectives is because of that really close engagement and collaboration throughout the entire 10 years that it took us to develop these regulations. And I think going forward, that's something that we have learned, and we're definitely going to continue to do that to make sure that everybody that's affected will be engaged to increase the quality of these regulations.
That's a really important soundbite, and I want to capture that moment because a lot of manufacturers don't understand, or maybe they don't make time to work with Health Canada because it helps them bring forward a lot of innovation here in Canada itself. And yes, it does take time, but I think, like you mentioned, being open and coming to the table and sharing some of these concerns or challenges, and how do we ensure that Canada remains competitive in the global scale. I think that's super important. I'm glad you said
Yeah.
that. 'Cause-
And, and this is one of the key messages that we try to bring across to our students that
Mm.
come to us at the University of Ottawa to take our graduate program in food policies and regulatory affairs is that regulation is not just the government, it's actually a team effort between the government and all the other stakeholders. And
Mhm.
as much communication and crossing over between the two sides, if you can do more of that, I'm convinced that, will even be better at doing what we do going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just the collaboration and getting that input is so important. And this is definitely an eye-opening conversation. I think it's so helpful to understand these different pathways and, being so immersed in the industry, William, and seeing the different pathways and different types of ingredients. Like, are there ingredients or categories, perhaps even functional areas that you're seeing in terms of trends or perhaps opportunities on the horizon for brands?
Yeah, so that's another good thing about working in the food regulatory side of things is things are always changing.
Oh,
Industry is always innovating. They're always steps ahead of the regulators. So we always have to try to play catch up and trying to figure out what's going on, what consumers are demanding, and
Mhm.
what industry is delivering. So yeah, so in the last few years, there's been some pretty exciting technology that have been coming into play. We've heard about different sources of protein. We have, there's insect proteins that are now being used quite commonly now, added to food. Even, how do we make um, meat products? There's now new
Mhm.
technology called lab-grown meat that
Mhm.
you can actually make chicken or beef um, in the lab without ever growing an animal. So these are all technology that they seem to be catching on more in other parts of the world than Canada, but definitely is coming. So we want to make sure that we're ready when the technology does arrive and when products start showing up, at the doorstep, either directly in the market or at the doorstep of Health Canada.
Right.
Um, the other thing that I've noticed in when I go to meetings that's been talked about a lot is also what today's consumer want, because consumer today is very different than the consumer that I was faced with 27 years ago or 30 years ago when I first started working at
Mhm.
Health Canada, with social media, with everybody wanting to know what's going on out there. They all have their own opinions. They're all following advice from a lot of these opinion leaders that may or may not be experts in the field,
Uh-huh.
but they have influence over what consumers want and buy. So, um, a term that has been used quite a bit, and in a way, it's kind of unfortunate because we don't really have a agreed upon definition of what an ultra processed food is. But you hear about this in the media, in social media all the time. And it's created some confusion in the food world. And some consumers are concerned about these foods because they may not be the most nutritious in most cases. They're usually high in, sodium, saturated fat, and sugar. That's probably why people like it, because it tastes good. Um, there's also another group of consumers that actually are more concerned about the kind of additives or
Mm.
ingredients that are added to these foods. So food color, I don't know, artificial sweetener, things like that, that, they feel may or may not be healthy or necessary to be in these foods. So right now, there's a lot of research and work going on in both government, academia, and industry to try to tease out what are these foods that we're actually talking about, and what are some of the challenges that we may want to overcome in making these foods either nutritionally better
Mhm.
or other ways to educate the consumers that food processing is not a bad thing. In some cases, you don't want to eat that food unless it's got certain additives because it may actually cause a lot of microbial
Botulism.
risk. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So natural is not always better. It's
Mm.
sometimes it's actually, there's a reason why we're treating a food a certain way. So to me, those are some of probably the hottest trend that, regulators and industry uh, are faced with in today.
Yeah. Yeah. Before coming on the podcast, you had mentioned that you were at a conference this weekend and you were talking about these trends.
Yeah,
But one of the highlights that you mentioned was that there isn't a lot of current data on how and what consumers are eating. So if you could share a little bit more about that and provide some insight on that one, because I think that's super
sure.
important.
Yeah. So another key message that we share with students and everybody is that we try to do our best in developing policies and regulations based on evidence and
Hmm.
based on science, because that's what makes, that's really fundamental. Because as I said earlier, there's so many people that have their own opinions. They have, people that tell them what's good, what's bad. So to cut through all that, the one thing that really is important to know is what's the latest science telling us.
Hmm.
And when it comes to nutrition and food, one key evidence that we need is always trying to determine what is the average consumer eating today or not eating today, because that's where you can determine, are they taking on too much food additives? Are they exposed to too much pesticide residues?
Hmm.
That's on the bad side. On the good side is you want to measure, are they getting enough nutrient? Are they getting enough
Yeah.
calcium? Are they getting enough vitamin D? Are they getting enough omega-3 fatty acids?
Hmm.
How do you know that? Well, the only way you can do that is to monitor and survey what the population is eating. And then if you know what they're eating and you know what's in the food, then you can calculate what nutrient they are either consuming too much of or not getting enough. So unfortunately, these survey studies are very difficult to do if you want
Hmm.
to do across the population. They are very expensive, very labor intensive. So in Canada, the last time we did a nationwide consumption survey, those results were published in 2015. So that was
Wow.
11 years ago. And right now, there's still no concrete plan yet when the next round of surveillance can be done.
Hmm.
So over the last few years, from industry, from academia, from health stakeholders, everybody has been really pushing the government to find the funding to start planning for this next nationwide survey, because
Yeah.
that's the only way we can generate the data that we need to do a truly evidence-based policy and regulatory decision making. So hopefully, under the current, financial restraint, that the message gets through and that, we can work together to start planning another survey to give us the data that we need.
Mm. That's really interesting. And you mentioned 11 years since the last survey has taken place. And, to pair up science with, what's actually going on with consumers and their consumption habits, would this be a self audit from consumers, or would it also be paired perhaps with like blood work that kind of goes along with the whole system? I'm curious about that front as well.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there are actually two different types of surveillance. So the one I was referring to is just basically consumption. So what is done is in the past, it's been done through a phone interview, and what did they call a 24-hour recall. So they will
Hmm.
ask, okay, if you remember what you ate, 24 hours ago, list the meals and the ingredients and the brand and all that, then they would go back and calculate the nutrients. there's a separate survey that actually do measure biomarkers. So they do take blood samples and other samples to actually see if consumer, the level of certain nutrients or, certain types of fat that is present, is increasing or decreasing over time. But that's a different survey that is done also not every year, but they would target different measurements that's relevant for the particular survey. So it goes in two different directions. One is consumption only, and the other one is actually what's happening inside the everyday consumer's body when it comes to nutrients.
Super interesting. And both needing heavily funded approach to it.
Yeah. If you want to do it right, everything is costly. But again, we have to be, I guess, innovative in different things we do. It's just because we did surveys before that is only done by the government and by Statistics Canada. Yeah. Can we maybe look into in the future some collaboration that maybe industry and other stakeholders and academia can work together with government and actually maybe develop some of these surveys and do them differently.
And tools. I mean, they're all wearing health trackers now that are
absolutely
totally. Exactly.
Our food. So recalling 24 hours shouldn't be too hard.
Yep. I was even going to say some even biometric companies, right, where they are collecting multiple samples, a little bit different in Canada versus the US, but
absolutely
interesting. Yeah.
The only challenge is that we have to make it uniform, right? We have to we have to apply the same across the country. So yeah, but it's exciting. I mean, there's all kinds
very
of
exciting.
Just doing it by phone is probably not the
I don't remember what I ate last week.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Dr. William Yan, right behind you, I know I want to address the elephant in the room. There is a sign that says University of Ottawa. So if you could share with our listeners a little bit about what you're doing there at the Food Policy and Regulatory Affairs.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I had the fortune to also do some teaching even when I was working at Health Canada. And we noticed that, there seemed to be a gap that with a lot of students who have, taken different science degrees and, they've learned how to do research and publish paper. But at a certain point, they think, well, is that all there is to, what I can do the next 40 years of my life? Or is there something else I can do? And when students come to me, none of them knew that, there is a potential career path that they can apply what they've learned and actually use that in the world of public health, policy, regulatory, work. So that's what really pushed us to launch a program at the university that really is for students that have already done a degree or multiple degrees. And we want to expose them to this world that, they may want to consider to use that knowledge to make a difference and help what we call evidence-based policy and regulatory development. So it's been pretty exciting. We've now done the program for a few years, and we're actually now changing the format. And starting September, we are launching a graduate diploma program for the first time that would allow students to learn the basics about how regulations are done, how do we translate science into policy and regulations, and then also give them a chance to apply this through an internship so that they can use it in a real life situation, either in government or industry, to apply what they've learned. And hopefully for those that are really interested, help them launch a successful career path in this area. So yeah, though it is great that, after retiring, I'm still able to hopefully share some of my experience with these students, and maybe, we'll generate create a whole new generation of, bright and talented regulators that can continue to make sure our food supply stays as safe and as nutritious as they have been.
Agreed. Are you still taking in, is the intake still open for students for the September program?
Yeah. So I think that we're still taking applications all the way until the end of July. And
perfect.
Yeah. So if anybody's interested, they should definitely take a look at our website and, take a look at what's available.
Yeah, we'll certainly put the link in on the notes for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. What a practical, it's like research science and then the practical application side, which is what a great combination.
Yeah. And what is exciting too is not just, I mentioned that, these are students that are just graduating, but we've also had students coming in from individuals that have already been working in the food industry for many years, maybe on the quality side or the, marketing side, but they're interested in the regulatory side of things. And they'll actually come in and take the program and learn what they need to know.
Yeah, continuous education and application to bring even more value. Well, that definitely sounds.
You're more than happy to. We're more than happy to have you to register.
I want to sit in on the class.
I know, me too. We would love to come in. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
okay. Okay. Oh my gosh. I cannot believe we would love to. We would love to chat all day because I feel like there's so much more to connect on. But I think that we're at this time, Laura. Is that right? Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
okay. So we have a bit of a tradition on our podcast, and it's where previous guests leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're leaving it for. So this one is coming in from Angela Santiago, CEO of the Little Potato Company, and her question to the next guest, being you, is what are the top 3 characteristics of a great leader?
Well,
that's a good question.
Yeah, so I guess I've been fortunate to have, in my career, worked with a lot of mentors and managers who have been really great at, leading and giving me directions and allowing me to develop into a manager. So I would have to say off the top of my head that probably the number one would be a manager that know how to direct and give directions, but also know when to step back and not micromanage, to allow the person that they are leading to show their, innovative side and let them try out things so that you're not just narrowing in their views into what you think they should be doing. So number one is that. The second one would be, I've always tried to treat my employee and my staff as much as equal as possible, because especially when working in a complex topic like food safety and nutrition, clearly one person cannot be the expert on everything. So you should be learning from people that you're leading as much as they should be learning from you. So trying to have that two-way communication and keeping your mind open to learning from people that you're supposed to be leading is also important. And then finally, the last one that I learned was that, in the early days, I felt that if somebody on my team come to me and say they have to leave because they find another job or they, have another career opportunity, in the early days, sometimes I would feel kind of bad and maybe actually think that maybe have I failed somewhere, that, this person don't want to work for me anymore. What did I do wrong? And then finally you learn that no, it's perfectly fine for somebody that is maybe a star in your organization to want to move on and take on new challenges and expand the horizon. And in many cases, a few years later, if you are actually a good leader and you provide an environment that is, conducive to teamwork and all that, some of those people would actually come back and knock on your door and say, hey, I've now learned all these extra things, but I would love to come back and apply that to help, continue to work in the organization. So quite often, when you least expect it, you actually, get back to people that you used to work with now because you're giving them the chance to go out and grow and learn new things, they now come back and actually is much, much more productive and can contribute much, much more to the organization than if they were just staying there the entire career. So that's something I learned, that, you have to let people go. And then in some cases, you actually benefit from that down the road and get the return that you get.
Oh, I love that. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing. Yeah, so being supportive and knowing when to step back and make sure that they grow into their own, person and their leadership qualities.
Yeah.
And especially encouraging that two-way communication. That's
Mhm.
super important. Well,
Yeah.
it's your turn. Not knowing who our next guest is,
Go, Ken.
what tough question would you like to give them?
Oh, well, I don't think that question was tough. It was actually a very, very, very good
It was
question.
good,
So,
yeah.
yeah. I guess in the same kind of topic area, again, talking about how, our world is changing so fast and, with new technology and everything else, I try not to mention AI in my entire,
No.
chat today.
Yes.
But now I'm going to bring that in. So,
Okay.
Okay, let's
so
layer
my
it.
question, so my question to the next speaker would be, with we all know that we're going to be faced with AI coming at us, whether we like it or
Mhm.
not. What do they think are the benefits or challenges, and how best to make sure that we use this exciting new technology in a way that's going to be productive, but not in a way that may actually be counterproductive.
Mm,
Ugh,
that's good. And I think so timely
so
as well.
timely.
What are your thoughts on it? And it's funny because we usually talk about AI almost in every
Almost every
episode,
podcast.
almost every
Oh,
single podcast. So what are your thoughts? Would love to hear your take on this.
but wait a minute. I'm not supposed to answer my own question.
I think we love your perspective if you're open to it.
I think to me, the challenges would be that, um, I think to me, AI is a tool,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So it's a
Mhm.
very powerful tool.
Yeah.
Can sometimes be a little bit of a scary tool, but I think if we approach it carefully, we can definitely use it to help us do our work much more effectively. So I went to a talk couple of years ago, and at the speaker, I still remember what he said. Like, to him, the AI is not much different than a calculator, right?
Oh, yes.
Before the calculator, we all have to learn the long times table, and you have to do everything in your head and write it out. Then the calculator come around, and you all do is punch a few keys. People say, "Oh, but that's cheating. You can't use a calculator. That's not doing math." But as long as you know what the fundamental basis is of
Mhm.
the math, the calculator is just a tool you can use to help you do things more efficiently. So to me, that may be oversimplifying a little bit, but you go back to that kind of, comparing the two. Really, AI is a tool, and as
Mhm.
long as you use it and not take shortcuts and not learn what you're supposed to know, then you then use it as a tool to help you do your work. Maybe it will allow us to get results faster and make discoveries faster. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like today, nobody questions
Right.
is it ethical, or is it wise to use a calculator when we're doing a math question?
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I just think about how much faster you can take a look at data and extract
Mhm.
data and
Yep.
come to
Big time.
better conclusions and
Yep.
faster conclusions. So
As long
yeah.
as we still make sure we double check and verify
Yeah.
Of
that.
course. Yeah.
Always.
What
We need to be
a
plugged in. Yeah.
because
That's still really important. Yeah.
yeah,
Always. Just like
Fundamentals.
you
yeah,
double check your math answers with, make sure those formulas are right.
Buddy check
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
Get your own thoughts in there. Do some constructive, thinking, all the
Yep.
things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dr. William, what what a gem for you to be on this podcast. I've learned so much already. I feel
Big
like
time.
this is a master class on everything regulatory. I think we have to do an extension.
We need a part 2 and a part 3,
We
perhaps a
do.
part 4.
Well, that's always a challenge, right? How to make regulations exciting or interesting.
Oh,
That's not always,
it's so
that's not always
exciting.
easy to do.
It's my passion too. I think it needs to be exciting.
It needs to be fun. Yeah.
It needs to be fun. Yeah. How can someone get a hold of you if they're interested in the University of Ottawa program? We'll definitely put a link to that application. But is there any other way that they can connect with you, perhaps on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. My email address. We can also put it out there, and
Okay.
you
Nice.
know, and there's a direct link to the graduate diploma program. We can definitely provide all that information so that people can have access to it.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts, and we're excited to continue this discussion. And there's so many things that are changing in this world, and it's exciting to certainly be a part of it, and to essentially interview guests like yourself. And I'm sure you'll have quite a few people reaching out as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a blast. So
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And
scene.
scene.